Welcome to Empathy Builds Understanding. In this webinar, we're going to go over all the things that you're going to need to know as your orientation for our design studio that we have coming up. Even if you're not attending our studio, this video will help you build empathy with either on your campus, in your corporation, with any of your students. And so we are really excited that this is hosted by Leadership and Design and The Fun. I'll be one of your coaches, Ashley Smith.
And I will be the other, and I'm Tara Curry-Jam with Leadership and Design. So let's start with just a very brief overview of what design thinking is. This is a process coming from the design world applied to education and other social service fields, where you're able to really take a complex, sticky challenge that has not been able to be solved easily and put it through a process where you start with empathy and you go through prototyping and testing in an effort to save time, money, and resources while inviting those who will be the recipients of the solutions to be part of the process. It's an important approach to problem solving that really starts with those people you're designing for and ends with new solutions that are tailored to meet and suit their needs. This is a picture from the Stanford D School and added to by the Center of Innovation and Teaching and Learning, really to articulate the 5-step process for design thinking that, as you can see, starts with empathy, which is really rooted in developing a deep understanding of the challenge. And why that's important in education is that we really believe that schools design experiences. Here's 4 core ways that you can imagine using design thinking at schools. So one, just being that understanding that all students have unique learning styles and unmet needs, and using a design process and mindsets to be able to understand how to deliver content and to impact student learning experiences. Another one might be that you could use it to teach content. So you could have a design thinking process rooted in a construction for like Habitat for Humanity to really say, how are we helping those students develop SEL and non-academic competencies in their academic career? You can also use it to help students build non-academic skills specifically, like social justice, community awareness, risk-taking, listening, and reducing perfectionism. And also to help solve classroom, school, and residential life challenges.
And don't feel that you have to pick just one. We have a lot of people that you pick one initially, and then throughout the studio or maybe throughout this orientation process, you may decide to change it. You may come in with an academic focus and then realize it's really a belonging focus, because to get to the academics, students need to feel like they belong. But we do believe that all things are designed, just like the previous slide said, about experiences.
Well, and then a design process can be used to solve problems for your students or members of your school community. And it could be used as an instructional strategy to help students learn about how to solve things for other people.
And the reason that we start with empathy is because it's the first part of this process, and you're working with the people instead of working for and doing solutions for. It's the idea that we are going to go to those who have insights to add in their perspectives. So you're collecting perspectives. That's what empathy is all about. And so in this phase, we are going to develop a deep understanding of the challenge. An empathetic approach fuels our process by ensuring we never forget we are designing for real people. And even when you go to the other side of it, like we like to say that we're designing with people. So we really are intentional about using that word, that we are co-designing. We work in teams, and the people that we work with are part of our design team. And so we really want you to have that idea that you are working with those people. Even the people you get insights from, you're still working with them as partners.
One of the reasons also why we really encourage practitioners to not only just do one strategy for building empathy, that it's just this concept of like deep empathy really leads to implicit insights, so that you can really challenge yourself to deeply understand someone, because people don't do what they say they do. They don't do what you think they do, and they don't do what they think they do. Meaning, if we only ever just interviewed or only ever just did observations, we might get a one-dimensional perspective. So this is an opportunity for us to say, I know I did the interviews, and I'm going to make some observations to be able to see what might be happening underneath.
For design thinkers, behaviors are never right or wrong, but they are always meaningful. So we're always using them to dig as a process to dig deeper and to think deeper.
And that even is a challenge for us to defer our own judgment and biases around what we're looking at a challenge with, because, if we're able to approach building empathy without our own filters of like why this is already happening, because we're placing judgment on the behaviors, it allows us to have a greater understanding and curiosity about the meaningfulness of what we're seeing. And this is a quote that we pulled from Henry Ford, and this is just also the concept of why we use design and why we try to use empathy to understand unmet needs, because it challenges us to say, before we build solutions, if we understand the needs of people, in this case, getting around faster or having transportation be less of a barrier, if Henry Ford had asked people, they would have said a faster horse, because that was the only thing at that time that was in the realm of understanding. So this is why we don't usually work with our stakeholders to ask them for solutions. We try to understand unmet human needs so that we can kind of be creative and innovative and push for an area of provocation before we start building solutions.
So there are some core methods for building empathy that we're going to review with you. Go ahead, Tara.
The first is just, as we stated earlier, like observing behavior, but doing so in context. So you're able to make observations, capture notes, make part, as far as your like notes to yourself around areas for deeper inquiry and wondering why that might be happening. Or maybe you want to do another strategy down the road to have some conversations about what you might be seeing. But this is just saying, harnessing that ability to be kind of a fly on the wall and make observations as about what you're kind of seeing about the priority focus group that you're trying to learn more about.
Yeah, and this is slightly different than those, like as a principal, we have to observe our teachers, and we have to observe all the time. The slightly different focus of this is that you're looking through the lens of your priority user group. So instead of me being like, oh, in the class, this was a missed opportunity, or the objective wasn't on the board, like I'm looking at like, how are the students experiencing this? Like, is the student understanding it? Are they getting it? I'm looking from their lens of like, what would they want this experience to be different or better? What would make it happen, flow better? Like, are they engaged? How do they define engagement? Like, do they think they're engaged? So it's a different process than me just kind of writing what is or is not happening. It's a little bit deeper than that, as we're really trying to unearth experiences and unearth some of the systemic things happening. So when you observe, you have to kind of put your principal hat to the side, or your leader hat to the side, your teacher hat to the side, and you want to look through the lens of who it is that you're focusing on in that environment.
This is the biggest one we're going to talk a little bit more about, but this is that concept of like directly engaging with members from your priority user group. So looking, listening, learning from the people themselves.
Yes, this is our favorite one.
And then finally, immersing. So experiencing something yourself. If you are interested in learning about how your students get to school, you go and identify a student, and you feel what it feels like to stand at bus stops, to sit on buses, to walk, to get a ride with their parents, like whatever it might be. This is that concept of experiencing something so that you can kind of have like what we traditionally might think of as empathy, is walk in the shoes of the participants that we're thinking about.
Yes, this is a lot of those shadow student experiences. If you've heard anything from the Stanford D School, which when I went to it and Tara was my coach, we did a shadow the student experience. And I tell you, it was tough. This was a really hard experience it's something that, once you move from the student position, there's not really an opportunity for you to go back and do that again. But this invitation to go back and do it again was one of the toughest things. I actually did not make it through my day. So hopefully you have more success if you're going to do a shadow a student, that you can plan it out, make sure that you're not on radio or those different kind of things, because then you get pulled right back into doing your job, and you kind of miss the opportunity of the experience.
I'm laughing a little bit, Ashley, because I did have a principal say in Colorado that he couldn't finish his day either, elementary, because it was so boring. So he had to stop his shadow day, which I'm like, that is in itself a huge insight for an elementary student to be bored all day. So yeah, being able to use all three of those strategies kind of in tandem to be able to create a multidimensional perspective of the challenge that you're trying to solve.
And that
So
is pretty
within
funny that you said that, because I will say that after that, I started a PD series about engagement because I was disengaged and I was like doodling, and then I was not paying attention, and the worksheets were being passed out and I finished them within like the first 2 minutes. And then I was like, along with some of the other students who also finished them in the first 2 minutes, and we all were bored. And then we were all trying to not get in trouble because we started talking. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm part of the problem in this classroom. I'm talking and the teacher's going to have to tell us all to stop talking. So I agree with you that sometimes that's where you get these ideas from, because you realize what's actually happening in your school, not what you think is happening, but what's actually happening in your school or your
Well, and
environment.
even thinking of one step further about that is like, so that would be like a case where we want to change instruction because it's disengaging. We've also experienced principals who had to do a 14-hour day just because they were following a high achieving student who was in lots of different clubs and had a high AP coursework. And so just understanding, if you're thinking about students who have high levels of anxiety or mental health issues, knowing like what they experience on a daily basis is a powerful experience for any school leader to be able to have. Which kind of brings us into this next topic around who are you going to build empathy with, and really just thinking about a priority focus group at your school, in your school community, that is experiencing a challenge so that you can better understand where that challenge is coming from and start to solve for it.
So on this one, you're going to focus on a priority group. And so when we say the term we use focus priority group. Sometimes we say that, sometimes we say priority group. You'll also hear in the design world, they use users. That's actually not our favorite term. So we like the term priority group or priority focus group. And so we're talking about a group in your school community, whether it's students, parents, educators, partners, families, community members, whoever, that are experiencing a challenge that you would like to dig deeper in and to investigate. And so we like you to kind of go like 3 levels deep is one way that we like to say it. Is though, so for my project, the one that I ended up investigating, I was doing so at first it was like Black male students that were, experiencing, like, had low attendance in our school. I ended up narrowing it down to where it was freshman Black students freshman Black males who were disengaged from school. And I had different reasons of how I was defining disengagement. And so I think that we would like you to focus on a small group of your population. Terry, do you want to say some more about that?
Just that, and I think there's a little bit more on the next slide, but that you're not, by choosing something small, a focused group, it doesn't mean that you're not going to test your solution and build something for the broader community. But by building something for those margins, it will help you build something that is meeting their needs, that can the generalized population might experience happiness with also. So focusing on the challenge, to think about the deeper roots of that system that created that challenge. And then this is what we're saying is like thinking about those at the margins of the challenge. So if you imagine a bell curve and you have 2 extremes that there's small populations at, while the majority are in the middle, you're thinking about those who experience the challenge greatly and those who don't experience it all. You can find about those could be the priority focus areas of your empathy work. And then asking yourself, of this challenge, of this population group, what do we need to learn more about? What assumptions are we making? What biases might we be thinking about, right? Like there's all kinds of solutions out there for attendance. And are they effective? Do we have a deep understanding of why students aren't coming to school before we start investing in the solutions on the table?
Yeah, and this is the idea of, we're not looking just at the surface, but this is that systemic part of it. So this is where equity has its place in this work, is that when we're looking at who is being most underserved by our current system, like it's not their fault that they're being, like, we are underserving them. And so it's looking at that. I love the phrase furthest from opportunity from the Stanford D School. So like who is furthest from opportunity? And that could be whatever you're looking at, there is always a group that is furthest from opportunity. So it's figuring out what are the characteristics that this group shares that is furthest from opportunity. And another way I like to see it is who has been historically marginalized where it comes to that. So one of those buckets, it gives you kind of a good idea of where to find your priority focus group, who's been underserved, who is furthest from opportunity, or who is in a group that has been historically marginalized.
So then as we think about building an interview plan based on that question of like, what do we need to learn more about? You're going to walk into this conversation with only 2 to 3 questions on the part of your challenge you want to learn more about, with a plan to take detailed notes or ask someone to join as a note taker. So again, these are also like human conversations. They are verbal surveys or an interrogation. So we really want this, option to have like a connection between you and whoever you're speaking with. And so sometimes having an external person who they can be focusing on capturing the stories and quotes and direct words from your interviewee, that might help you to connect. So you're not putting your head down. But if you don't have that extra person, you're totally welcome to just make sure that the person you're talking to is aware that you're taking notes and for what the purpose is. And then keep the authentic voices as best you can. So don't paraphrase, literally keeping the voices of the students or the community members in quotes in your notes will help preserve some of the potential bias or kind of like filters that each of you and your interview team might have. And even if it's not intentional, we all just listen in a way that just kind of does our own translating. And so that's why we just encourage people to stick to the authentic voices as best as possible.
Yeah. And 2 to 3 questions I know sounds really, really low, but it's not, it's like your 2 to 3 starter questions, because then someone says something. So if I was interviewing Tara and she's just like, yeah, well, I'm really struggling with this thing, then I'm going to take her words and be like, okay, you just said you were struggling with that. So what does that mean? Can you tell me what that looks like? What does that sound like? Can you tell me a little bit more about this thing that you say you're struggling with? So I have these starter questions, but then I'm using the person's words to dig deeper into what they say is happening. And I'm also asking for words, so definitions. I'm not assuming that I know the definition of, like, if we both say struggle, that we both mean the exact same thing. Like, I want to know from her perspective, you said the word struggle. Can you tell me what that means, like, for you, what that looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like? Like, I'm trying to get an insight into, where she's coming from. And so sometimes for me too, I also might go into the interview with 5 because I get nervous and I don't want to not have any, but I'm only going to ask like my ones that I focus. So if you feel like being prepared helps you out and like you're like nervous about it, then you can go prepared, but just know you're only going to kind of do 2 to 3 starter questions and then you'll take it from there.
Then we're just going to share briefly like the architecture of an empathy interview. And so this is, again, borrowed from the Stanford D School. And this is, with many conversations we all experience, this is kind of an arc of how you might do it. So introducing yourself, making sure the student knows who you are, why you're having this conversation. So you're introducing the project of no one's in trouble. You're just wanting to learn more. There's a respect there of like, you actually care about what the students or family members have as far as what they're willing to share. Spend some time building rapport so you can really like make it feel not like, as I joked earlier, not an interrogation or a verbal survey. Like, you actually want to like create rapport so you can make yourself and them feel comfortable having this conversation. And then you're gonna ask those questions. You're really gonna evoke some stories and explore emotions in the hopes that those will all be really powerful pieces of information. The other part of when we talk about capturing notes, of the parts where you can do some interpretation of, like, it's really where you can document those emotions. So did people lean in? Did they lean out? Did they shut down? Did they get really excited and talk a really long time about this one thing that happened? Those are all really powerful insights. In addition to the quotes, you also have watched the body language of what happened. So you can capture some notes on the side of your note catching to be able to just make sure that you remember that emotion that was present. Make sure that you give them time at the end to ask you any questions, or if you like one of the key hints is there anything I didn't ask that you wanted to tell me? That's just a nice thing to have in your back pocket as you wrap things up. It's a mutual respect. And also they might have something to offer that you didn't think of, or that got brought to mind as you asked your questions. Or maybe they walked into the interview wishing they had somebody to tell this to. So that's just all good information, create space for them. And then even when you think about this, play with like a 90-10 ratio where you're talking 10% of the time and you're trying to get your interviewee to be talking most of the time. Thank them for their time and wrap up. And I want to just caution that this interview, it could be anywhere between a 5-minute quick conversation all the way to like a 30-40 minute conversation with a one-on-one or a small group if students feel more comfortable doing it as a 2 or 3 together. And then another, if we are able to do a triad interview, sometimes I will do the interview, and then as the person I have brought is capturing notes, I'll create space for them to ask 1 or 2 questions as a note taker, because they might have heard things differently than I did. So that's just kind of like another little hint to be able to do these interviews well.
Yes. And seeing as, again, an equity focus that we always have is that in that beginning, you're asking permission. So because you're pulling a group that is from a member of an underserved community, a historically marginalized community, a community that has not been able to have access to something, then the first part of it, like how you present yourself and those power, like the power play that happens, that you make sure that you let the person know that you're partnering with them is really important. So a lot of times, even to a student, I'm just like, like, hey, Deshawn, I just really wanted to talk to you. I think I have a question that I've been trying to answer about, why some students are not engaging in the full. And I think you have something that you can tell me about that. Would you mind if I interviewed you tomorrow, maybe right after lunch? Does that work for you? What do you think about that? And sometimes Deshawn's like, yeah, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's set it up in our schedule, and I'll email you, make sure you have a pass for class. So it's that making sure that you get their permission and he knows what we're talking about coming into it. There's even been some students that said, what are the questions? And I'll send them the questions ahead of time. I'm just like, oh, here are the questions so you can think about them, like just like we would do one another. I'm making sure that they come into that feeling as confident as possible ahead of time. So I think it's like asking, sometimes I might say, hey, do you have any questions about this? Well, if you have any, between now and our interview, let me know. But it's just really like, I just want to hear from you, and you don't need to bring anything, just yourself, because you have the wisdom that I need to tap into, and I think it's just really making that person feel good about the fact that you're asking permission and that you're wanting to hear what it is that they have to say.
Yep. And as Ashley said, even the power differentials of being aware of where you're having these conversations, calling someone, if you're a school leader, calling them to the principal's office or to a classroom, or going on a walk, taking them out to lunch, whatever the permissions are in your context, just have an awareness around how they might be perceived by whoever you're speaking with. And even if you wanted to do an A/B test of if I have it on the classroom or if I have it out in front of the building, like, is there a difference in the types of responses I get? That's all like you as an explorer, exploring your own empathy building practice. Those are just things that you can try on.
And a question we got from our group was about how many people should we have? So we just want to make sure we cover that, because that was a question that quite a few of you had, was how many people should we have in a group? And we said no more than 3. So if, like, when you have when you get 5 students together, sometimes they start performing for each other and start getting approval from each other on their answers, and you kind of lose that authenticity in the room. So I wouldn't do any more than 3 at a time. If you're having a focus group, and that's only after you do a couple one-on-ones, because the one-on-ones really help you settle your questions too, of like, these questions are the ones that I really need to ask, because these are the ones that are really getting me good data and good information from my students. So I think that, like, keeping the number of students you have, especially if you're doing a power imbalance, like students, if you're doing adults, you might be able to have 5 adults in the room and they're fine. But I think it's just being aware of how people are playing off of each other too, as you're doing these interviews. Mm-hmm.
So kind of to review, here's a few tips for conducting that interview, because we really want to acknowledge that no one expects perfection. This is a practice to be able to continue to build in your own self. And so these are just some hints that we have learned along the way. Why is a very powerful term, or as a question for designers, because it allows you, as Ashley said earlier, to start peeling back that onion and going deeper on the things that seem really insightful that the user is sharing with you. Never say usually when asking a question. So really tell me about a specific time, or tell me about the last time this happened, and get them to tell you a story about the time they went to school where they felt really safe, the time they went to school where they felt really unsafe, the time where a teacher really cared about them, like really like saying, like, when did this happen and how did it feel? Look for inconsistencies. What they say and do can be different. Pay attention to nonverbal cues. Be aware of body language and emotions. And this is a hard one for me as well. Maybe many of you, is that don't be afraid of silence. So in that 90-10, like trying to ask questions and just letting things be quiet until that user might speak up, or that student might speak up, will really get you some interesting insights, because it's in that silence where new thoughts might come into the conversation. And then finally, you're trying to do open-ended, not yes or no questions, and just be really aware that you're not kind of like leading the witness, like you're asking questions neutrally that don't suggest answers.
And remember to follow up. So as the person's talking, and this is my favorite thing to do, like the follow-up questions, because I think the follow-up questions are where it gets really deep. It's like, can you tell me more about that? Just asking why. Can you tell me why? Is there anything I didn't ask but you want to share? There's also, like, my favorite question is like, if you were sitting in this chair, what would be the first question you would have asked you? So I think sometimes getting the questions from the people that I'm interviewing is my favorite thing, because it sets up my next interview to be at an even stronger spot. Or if you were the boss, what are some changes you would make? So I think it's some of those questions. And you'll see in our empathy building toolkit that we have for you all, we have some of these questions that are in there just as to give you a starter point or just a preview of some things that you can ask. And then
And
again,
I would
make
also
sure
say
go ahead.
that as you think about your interviews, you don't have to do the same questions every time. So you might find some question that really got a student talking. You can lead with that one the next time. So these are, again, like if you know about the challenge you're trying to learn more about and how it impacts this priority focus group, don't make yourself stick with a script. Like, let these be emergent as you have more conversations and practice your empathy building and interviewing skills.
And then the last thing is to thank them for their time. So whoever it is that you're interviewing, always thank them for their time. You may also want to tell them next steps of like, thank you for this information. Here's what I'm going to go do with it. I like to circle back and follow up with you after we meet with my team. Is that okay with you? So I think it's like also like thanking them for their time and then letting them know what comes next. Like you just took their time. Like, what are you going to do with the information that you got? So I think it's honoring the fact that they decided to sit down with you and letting them know what those next steps are. Even if your next step is, I'm going to go figure it out.
Yep.
But I think it's just offering them that next piece about now what.
Okay, I think we are going to get real specific about the plan for the studio. So if you're joining us for a studio upcoming, make sure that you engage a team of 3 to 5 educators, leaders, or stakeholders to be on your design team and to attend the studio. This will help you, because if you have that design team, design is radically different if you have a good group of designers who can help you diverge and converge when you get into the rest of the design thinking process. It'll also really help you in talking to more students and bringing more voices into the design studio. So if everybody on that team does 3 or more empathy building activities, that is about 15 that you'd be able to bring to the conversation. There is a provided workbook that we will share with this video to help you build your design challenge. We ask some questions around focusing on your group that you'd like to work with, and then there's some space to do some brainstorming for your interview questions. And then we really just ask you to come ready to learn and work on a relevant project that matters to your school and enjoy working with other school leaders in your community. Between now and the studio, we really want to give you time to do those empathy interviews. And again, they could be anywhere between 5-10 minutes all the way up to 30-40 minutes. And if you are dividing up within your team, you should be able to get that number done. And then at the studio, you're going to bring all of the data to the studio, and we're going to synthesize it together using some design thinking processes. And within that time, you're then going to build it and design some solutions that right after lunch, you're going to put in front of students at your own building so that you can learn from them, gain more empathy, make some iterations, and then you're going to bring that learning back and do some action planning for next steps.
If you're watching the replay of this, then check the website that we'll have posted with this video, and then go check the current studio agenda and see what's going on with that studio. So if you are coming to our studio in February at 1 o'clock is when we're going to have you meet with your students. If you're watching a replay of this or you're a recording of this for another kind of studio that we're doing, check the website and all the details will be posted there.
Okay. If you have any questions from this video, please reach out to the fund and they'll help you get in touch with either one of us. And thank you so much. We're excited to see you.
Yes, see ya.